Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Happy New Year! I hope it's going great. It is January 4th. I hope that the first 4 days of the year have been amazing and happy for you, and that it continues being like that through the rest of the year. In today's video, we are going to be talking about all the books that I read for December, so let's just jump right in.
What we do here is go back.
I read a total of 12 books for December, a little bit less than November, but that's okay with Christmas and spending time with people. It's okay. This is the first month where I have the majority of 3-star books, as to where in prior months I had 4 and 5-star books up the wazoo. So starting off the month with Unburied Carol by Josh Malerman. You guys already know, and if you don't, Josh Malerman is my favorite author. I just love his work. I love his writing. But I still have a couple of his books to read. Unburied Carol was one of them. This is just a book that I was very curious about, number one, because it is from my favorite author, and number two, it's because it has a Western flair to it. And so while I didn't love the book, I didn't hate it either. Here we are following Carol, and she has this medical condition where she'll just drop down and look like she's dead, but she's really not dead. Nobody knows about her condition except 3 people. Honestly, 2 that we're dealing with in the book, but the only people that know about her conditions are her mother, her husband Dwight, which just married her for her money and her wealth, and then another person, James Moxie. And James Moxie and her used to be in a relationship, but nobody else knew aside from that. And something in her gut kept telling her to tell somebody else, but she goes into one of her sleeping things and doesn't tell anybody else about her condition. Basically, you can barely hear a heartbeat on her when she is in one of these comas. She can hear everything that's going on, but she can't move, she can't do anything. And so her husband takes advantage of this situation and tries to bury her alive. And so obviously there's concern, there's suspicion by some people about what's going on because he's acting kind of weird, but word makes it out to James Moxie that Carol has died, and he's like, wait, what? So he's on a journey to reach her because he has a suspicion, or he has an inkling that she's not dead, and he's trying to beat it to that town so that he can be like, no, she's not dead, before the husband buries her. So it was an okay book. Very, very unique premise. I loved the characters. My only thing is that I found myself a little bit bored throughout the book. But the story was so unique, and although I knew how it was going to end because it's sort of a given when you hear the premise of the book, I was still interested enough to see what twists and turns he would take with the story. So I ended up giving this book 3 stars. The second book I finished for the month of December was actually a Nightworms book party, and that was for the Valancourt book of World Horror Stories Volume 1. This is just basically a collection of short stories of translated works from around the world. Valancourt Books has the best Christmas horror books or collection of short stories that I have read, and this was really, really good as well. I loved reading stories from different parts of the country that were translated, and you hear in the beginning of the book, you read that they had a really hard time with this because there's not a lot of translated work out there, or better yet, there's not a lot of translated short stories out there. And so they set out on this journey, and I really enjoyed this. I find that international horror is just a bit darker than our regular American horror, if that makes sense. I don't know, there's just something colder and darker and more sinister in international horror stories that I just love. But I've said this before in 2 other books that I've translated, works that I have read. I feel like there's always something lost in translation, some kind of meaning or feeling, for me at least. And so this suffered a little bit from that, of course, because it is all international stories. I mean, we have Italy, we have Spain, we have, let's see what else. Finland, South Africa, Denmark, Quebec, the Netherlands, Catalonia, Norway, Philippines, Italy, I already said, Mexico, Ivory Coast. I mean, there is a bunch of stories here. And so I just had that little gripe with it. My favorite story in here was the Italian story. I don't know if I'm being biased or not, but I tend to usually like Italian stories. And the name of the Italian novel, or the name of the Italian short story is Ironda. I don't know how to pronounce it, but that one was so good. I loved it. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. 3 stars for me usually is not a bad rating. I mean, it isn't a bad rating, but collection of short stories usually for me ends up being right on the 3-star mark, you know, because not all stories are gonna be great and you're gonna have hits and misses, which is usually what happens to me. Usually I get more misses than hits in collections, but this one I think was an even amount of unliked and liked stories, so that's why I went with 3 stars. Next, I finished In the Holidays by Christina Lauren. I enjoyed this one so much. It wasn't as good as The Unhoneymooners. I know I keep talking about The Unhoneymooners every time I talk about Christina Lauren, but I just can't help it. That is my favorite book by them at the moment, and so there's always going to be a set bar almost for their work with that book. With that being said, I really did enjoy this one. Here it's almost like a Groundhog Day kind of thing, but not. Here we're following May, and she and her family and like friends of the family, like another family that's friends with them. Wow. They usually, for the winter and Christmas time, they end up going to this cabin for years and years and years and years and years and years and years. They've been doing this, but there is a possibility that this is going to be the last year that they're doing this. And now May is like down in the dumps with her life. I believe she doesn't love her job. She's just not happy, and so the only happiness for her are these times that they get to go to the cabin and she gets to hang out with with her childhood friends. And so there's a possibility that this is the last time, and so she sets out to the universe and she's like, listen, show me a sign. How can I be happy? Show me how to be happy. And next thing you know, she's getting into an accident, but when she wakes up, or at some point after that, she's right back to where they're in the plane going to, so she ends up going back to a certain point, and if she gets something wrong, she ends up going back as well. So she has to find a right path to continue living, and I guess the universe is showing her what's gonna make her happy. It was so sweet. It's predictable, you know. It was a predictable story, but it was sweet, it was fun, it was very atmospheric. I really enjoyed it, and I ended up giving this book 5 stars. You know, now that I'm thinking about it, I feel like giving it 4 stars, but I remember having that like, oh, feeling after I finished it, and it was like wintry and stuff, and cabins. I love winter cabin kind of themes, and so I think that's why I ended up going with 5 stars. Next book I read was Gone to See the Riverman by Christopher Triana, and holy, this novella was so good and twisted, and I don't know what else to say. In this story we are following Lori, and Lori is a little bit obsessed with Edmund Cox. He is a serial killer that has butchered about 20 women, and she starts writing to him, and she ends up being sort of like in a relationship with this man, and he sends her on a quest that she has to go to this little cabin in the middle of nowhere in these woods. I don't know if it's Killen or Killeen or Killen. I don't know what it is. Killen maybe. But she has to go to this cabin and take out and retrieve something from there and then go up the river to take it to the Riverman. So she sets out on this quest, but she brings her little sister with her, or her sister. While they're on this journey to get to this cabin, retrieve this thing, you know, you are sort of inside of Lori and her thoughts and what she's been through, how her sister became handicapped, the backstory between her sister, her brother, and her parents, and what a fucked up family, or not really fucked up family, but fucked up situation that Lori was in, and you're following her as well as she's on this trek to go see the Riverman and hand him this artifact or thing that Edmund told her to do. It was such a wild ride. If you have not read Gone to See the Riverman and you like horror and you like them short and you like them sweet and you like them with a bang, read this book. It was amazing. It left me with all the feels and it was just incredible. I ended up giving this book 5 stars. Next, I finished a book that I have started all the way from August, and that is The Raven by Jonathan Janz. I actually had an e-arc of this. And again, I've had it since like about August, and this book released in September and I still hadn't read it. I started reading it in August, but I've been reading little bits, pieces here and there because it was an ebook and I was just having a hard time picking up my Kindle. But I have finally finished and it's like a weight off my shoulders almost. I really enjoyed this book. So in this book, basically we are following an apocalyptic world. So one day there was these scientists that were sitting around and they were afraid that the world would end in a nuclear explosion. And so they realized that mythical creatures such as vampires, werewolves, cannibals, and all these other creatures, these mythical creatures, were once real. And some humans still had some of those DNAs hidden in their bodies. And so they came up with this like thing that they released in the air, and it basically brought out these DNAs. So now we have werewolves, vampires, cannibals, satyrs, and all these things just running wild in the world. But you also have humans that don't have any of these mythical DNAs in them. And so it's just this world where there's like battling between these mythical creatures. Humans had to be careful. I mean, it's all this whole dark world. And so we're following this character, Des, and all you know is that he is trying to reach this man, this very powerful man, because he took his wife. And he is on a mission to get his wife back. And throughout the whole story, you are basically learning a little bit more about Des and his backstory as he's finding his way to this bar where this very feared man is at. This book was so good, and one of my favorite things in this book was Jonathan Janz's world building. I thought it was perfect. We really got to know Des. We really got a sense of the atmosphere and just how vile this world was. What I do want to say is that I feel like the dialogue and just the whole writing in general in this book was a little bit one-dimensional for me, and so although the fact that it was one-dimensional made it a real easy read, although it took me months to read. But that wasn't why, because it's an actual easy book to read. But sometimes it just left me wanting more, or it left me desiring something more in the story. I don't know how else to explain it. Either way, it was a very unique story, bringing all these mythical creatures. I really did enjoy Des's character. I don't know if I said that already, and the journey that he went on. I ended up giving The Raven 3 stars. Next up, I finished A Savage Breed by Patrick C. Harrison III. This is the 6th book in the splatter western series that Death's Head Press is releasing or has released. This was a Nightworms book party, and I will say that this wasn't a favorite among the group. It's a tough book to read. I enjoyed the majority of it, but I did have some complaints. But let's get into the synopsis of the book. Here we are following 3 different sets of characters. And so at the beginning of the book, we walk into this execution, and somehow the execution never happens, and these bands of misfits, or whatever you want to call them, get to escape. And so you're following their story, and they're trying to make it to their next job. These guys are like thieves and killers, and so you're just following them along as they're trying to get to another job, I believe. Then you are following this man that is out for revenge. He gets home one day and he finds his little daughter and his wife mutilated and murdered. And so he's on a quest to find the people that did this to them. And then you're following this little girl. I honestly can't remember the names of the characters in the book, but then you follow this little girl, and this little girl, I don't even know what to say about this little girl. I think that she is the most disturbing part of this book. And then, of course, you have supernatural creatures somewhere in the mix. So you're following these three sets of characters. All of these characters are trying to get to a different destination or trying to achieve something different. But somewhere along the way, the stories unite with these creatures, and that's the story, or that's the premise of it. Now, a savage breed, like, that's the title of the book. The title holds so much to this because these are savages, and the little girl is the most savage of all. I want to put warning to racial slurs, racial comments, bestiality, rape, a lot of rape. One says like the worst things about another group of people, and the racial slurs. The little girl, I don't even want to get into what the little girl does, but... And this other group of men, they're just a bunch of rapists. They treat women bad. And so a lot of the people in the group, in the Nightworms group, were saying how all of these things are fine in a book, but there has to be a story with it. And they felt like this didn't have enough of a story. It was just splatter to be splatter. It was just gory to be gory, that there was no storyline behind it. I enjoyed it. Some of the things did bother me. Especially like some things that were said about the Indian people and things like that, but I feel like that is part of what the book is. It makes you feel those things like nastiness and disgust, and it gets you mad, and I think that's what makes it what the title is. A bunch of they're savage breeds. It's in the title, but I ended up giving this book 3 stars. Some people DNF'd it, some people gave it 1 star, some people, you know, I think it's like 2 or 3 of us in the group that enjoyed the book, and we had our complaints but overall enjoyed it. The rest of the people were like 1 stars, 2 stars, DNFs, no. So enter at your own risk. I gave you the content warnings and you go from there. Next, I read The Library at Mount Char by Scott Hawkins. This was December's Stacks of Strange pick. We already had the live show for this. I will link that down below. I won't go into too many details. I honestly can't tell you what I read, but again, I'm leaving that down below. I have not rated this on Goodreads yet, but I think I'm gonna end up giving it 2 stars. We're here basically following this library of this group of kids. It's 12 kids that came together one day after something catastrophic happened in their town, and all the parents died except these kids. And so this man comes and takes these 12 kids into his care, and he starts teaching them different things for each one of them. It's kind of weird to explain. It's like this whole library, and they each have like a different department, and they learn about their different departments. Like one of them has languages, the other one has resurrection, and blah blah blah, but they can't share with each other what they learn. Like they can't share that trait with anyone, like teach any other one of the kids their traits. And it's just weird. Go watch the live show, you'll see what we think. 2 stars. Next, I read Jimmy the Freak by Charles Colliot and Mark Steensland. This is a very little short book, and I really did enjoy it. Here we are following Jimmy, and he was dropped as a baby, and because of this, he has gained psychic powers. But he has issues because of being dropped and because of hitting his head. People take advantage of him because he is psychic. And one day Mike, which is actually Jimmy's bodyguard in whatever line of work that Jimmy does, that's a spoiler, so I don't want to tell you what it is, but he decides to get Jimmy and run. Just run, because he's tired of seeing how people treat him, and he's been part of that kind of treatment as well. And he just becomes disgusted one day, takes him on the run, and he's trying to protect his life. But somebody from this organization that Jimmy worked at is now following Mike and trying to kill him and trying to bring Jimmy back. So it's just that story. It's a sad story, and it's very heartfelt, but I didn't connect with it. But I did enjoy the story though. It was a good story, very well written, fast read, gripping. I liked the characters, but there was an emotional disconnect for me somewhere in the story where usually a book like this would make me tear up and cry. I think I wasn't that invested or connected with the characters, but I did like the overall story. I haven't rated this yet either because I'm sort of like in limbo of what to give it. Right now I'm leaning at a 3 stars. If you guys want to check my Goodreads and see what I end up giving this along the way, then go ahead. I always link my Goodreads down below if you guys want to check out what I'm currently reading and what I'm rating and what I'm saying. Go ahead and follow me there. But yeah, I think I'm going to end up giving this one 3 stars. Next, I read my first Naomi Novik, which is Spinning Silver. I do own her other 2 books. I'm actually in the middle of reading Deadly Education. But Spinning Silver, I loved so much. I didn't realize the connection that I was building along with this story until the very end. Here this is a Rumpelstiltskin retelling or inspired story, although I really didn't get that, but it could just be because I'm not very familiar with the Rumpelstiltskin. Like, I do know his story, but I'm not in depth educated on his story. Maybe it's that. Here we're following a couple different characters and I feel like I get muddled in between the characters, so please excuse me if I am making no sense, but we're following Miriam. The family has always run like a lending, like where they lend money and stuff to people, but her father is not really good at it because he loans people money but he never collects on them, so they're very poor. His daughter Miriam is just pissed. He's like, this is our money, we're living like crap because he doesn't want to collect money from these people. These people owe him the money. It's not like he's asking for free money. And so she finds it upon herself to start collecting that money, this little girl, and she's like, no, with this, she ends up in the business as well. Her grandfather is a money lender as well, and so, you know, it's just that story of her getting this money back for them. But this catches the attention of a Staric prince. And the Staric are grim fey creatures who seem more ice than flesh. So they live like in another dimension, and she catches this prince's eye because she can collect all this money or whatever. But at the same time, we're following these other 2 characters. One of them is Wanda, and she basically works for Miriam, and the other one is this girl, I can't remember her name, but she's basically supposed to marry this Tsar. But there's conflict here because this Tsar is trying to overtake the Staric world somehow, and so they're trying to find a way to stop him. And we're learning all about the Staric, which are just these evil or dark fays that live in this dimension. I think it's another dimension. It's the same world, but I think you have to go through, it's like maybe like a secret dimension or a secret world. And so we're learning about the Staric as well behind the scenes, and it was just a good story. I love the twists and turns that it took. It was very well fleshed out with all these characters. The world I really liked. I enjoyed the characters, but I feel like I had more of a connection with the story than the characters themselves, which is usually the other way around for me. Usually I fall in love with the characters and that makes the book for me. But I loved it. It gave me the feels and I ended up giving it 5 stars. Next, I read Anna and the Apocalypse by Catherine Turner with Barry Waldo. We actually did a Scary Little Christmas-a-thon in December, so this book and Jimmy the Freak were for that readathon. I loved this book. It was cheesy. It was young, it was ridiculous at times, but it was apocalyptic and I loved it. Here we're following Anna and her best friend John, basically. But Anna is a straight A student. She is really good at school, but her mom has recently passed away and she's trying to cope with that. She decides that instead of going to college, being a straight A student, she's just gonna take maybe a year off and go travel the world. And her father is really against this. They get into a fight. And one day, next thing you know, they're walking to school, Anna and John, and they come across a zombie and they're like, what is going on? And he's like, you know that was a zombie, right? And she's like, no, it couldn't have been, you know, so they're like arguing. But yeah, lo and behold, there is the zombie apocalypse in the middle of Christmas time, which I thought was amazing, you know, like zombies, I love zombies, and Christmas, I love Christmas. I think this was just the perfect mix. And you're just following Anna and John and a couple of other students trying to beat out the apocalypse, and at the same time beat out the assistant principal of the school. He is the worst. He thinks he's above everybody, and he is just evil and mean, and so they're trying to just beat him and beat the zombie apocalypse all at the same time. It's funny, it's witty, it's cheesy, as I have already said. I loved everything about this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I really want to watch the movie, which I didn't even know was a thing till recently, and I really want to watch it because I really did enjoy even the cheesiness of the book. Sometimes I was just like rolling my eyes, but that's just my kind of book and I loved it. Then I read Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. I wish I could love this, but I don't. You guys know that Kingdom of the Wicked I loved so much, so much. It was a 5-star read for me, and I love her atmospheric writing, and so that's why I wanted to read this. I mean, I've been wanting to read this for a while, but I loved how atmospheric this book was, but it bored me a little bit.
I always forget people's names.
Here we are following Audrey Rose as she is doing an apprenticeship with her uncle. Her uncle and her father really aren't on speaking terms. Her father thinks that what his brother does is just ridiculous, and they're basically scientists and they study the body. They're like morticians. If I'm not mistaken, I think they turn out to be the equivalent of morticians back in the day. This is in the 1800s. And so she loves everything about the dead bodies and studying the body and stuff, and so she's doing an apprenticeship under her uncle, I hope I'm saying that right, where she meets another boy that's also doing an apprenticeship under her uncle. While all of this is going on, there are murders happening. Jack the Ripper, he is loose, they're trying to find him, and so every time that there's a murder, her uncle and herself are called to the scene and they inspect and everything, but she is set to find who Jack the Ripper is. She has set it in her mind that she wants to find out, and it's just the journey of her trying to figure out who Jack the Ripper is through all these dead bodies. And while I loved the premise of the story, I loved how atmospheric it was, that's where all my love for it ends. I wasn't really interested in the story. I found myself bored sometimes, then really interested at other times. And to me, it just lacks something. I think all of this just stems from this being a historical fiction, a YA historical fiction with it being in the 1800s, and I think that just, it brings the book down a little bit for me in a sense, but I really liked the premise of the book and the fact that it's a girl that's trying to, you know, she's like so empowered, she's so like where women usually don't go. She's like, oh, if I like it, I'm gonna go there. I loved her character. But either way, I ended up giving this one 3 stars because to me, atmosphere is everything. And so I really did enjoy the atmosphere in this book. This is a very beloved book though, so please read it and make your own opinions about it. But I love the cover, and 3 stars. The last and final book that I read was Trick or Treater and Other Stories by Brianna Morgan. First off, I backed up the Kickstarter, so I was gonna read it either way, but I ended up getting the ebook. I haven't received the printed book yet. I think they're running behind with COVID and everything, but I did pick up the ebook because we ended up doing a side-by-side for the Nightworms blog. I will link all the Nightworms book parties and side-by-sides that I mentioned in this video down below so that you could check each one out. But we ended up doing a side-by-side for this as well, and I loved this book. This is a short story collection, and it is about 85 to 90 pages. It is really tiny, but the stories in it pack a punch. My favorite, of course, was the Trick or Treater. I loved it so much. What I loved most about these stories were how different they were. We see a witch hanging, we see a ship and a storm out at the sea with the characters and a raging storm that's going on. We have a ghost story. We have an evil house, a haunted house. I mean, there's so many different stories and one each different from the rest. I loved it. Each story had its own voice and was easy to follow. And I think I've said this before, but sometimes when I read short story collections and I read them back to back, the stories tend to muddle themselves. But with these stories, I was able to tell the difference between each. I didn't get them confused. I loved each and every one. I loved Brianna Morgan's writing. This is the first time that I read something by her. I actually own Unboxed, which is like a screenplay, which I haven't read yet. I am going to, because I just fell in love with her writing, her dialogue, her characters. She has a new fan for sure. I ended up giving The Trick-or-Treater 4 stars. So that's it, you guys. Those are all the books that I read for the month of December. Let me know down below what you read. What was your favorite book? What was your not so favorite book of the month? Let's chat books in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.